Okay then, so yeah, Derek at Scott's. This video is really the important one. It's telling you how to set these machines up to get the best out of it. Quite a lot to know. There's some great information on our website. There'll be a link there on the video. You can just click on, it takes you straight to our Evolution setup page. It's all written down, it's got the numbers, the speeds, the things you need to know. So that's a really useful thing. There'll be a QR code as well that you can just click on, it takes you straight there. So, but I'd like to explain how it works. It's an easy way perhaps just to get the points across. So, we spoke earlier about how it works, that we've got clod and stones and haulm and soil and potatoes, generally we're talking about potatoes, in the valley. And it's all about what happens in that valley and how it cleans. So what I want to talk to you about is where do we start with settings? So you've got a brand new machine there, or you're new to it, or you've got problems, and you want to know where do I start? Where's my basic starting point to work from? And there is a basic starting point to work from, quite honestly. Another little word of advice is once we get to that point, and you've got your settings set down, and you're happy, when you make adjustments, go one at once. Don't be tempted to jump into changing the height, the speed. What you'll find is you'll alter one thing and you'll see a cause and effect. You do two things, you don't know what's helped, what's made it worse. So be one at a time, be pragmatic, and if you adjust something, don't be afraid of adjusting it a fair amount. So if we're talking about speeding a clod roller up from number 1 and you want to go a bit faster with it, don't be afraid to go to number 10. Make a big change and see the difference. Then it's easier to see how far you've gone and then to bring it back to the right position. We often find if you make a very small adjustment, you really can't see what the difference was. You need to make a big step, and then if you've just gone that bit too far, then you can find the middle ground. So that applies to everything really, with the speeds, the heights, the gaps. So that's what you're looking for. And we're looking for cause and effect. Okay, so as we say, crop flows in from the rear of the machine over the table, over each pair of rollers. All the action is between these valleys. So you're looking for what's going out the machine at the bottom to see what job it's doing. Not so much on top. So it's important that you can see what's coming out. Mostly we have a waste belt, but just get yourself in a position where you can actually make an adjustment, see what's going on the top, and then perhaps have a look beneath and see what's happening. You might find you've made an adjustment and all your potatoes are crushed and they're going out the waste belt, unlikely. But it'll give you a steer of whether you're going too far with your adjustments and if you need to come back a bit. Right, so let's talk about main crop potatoes. Fresh off the field, we've got soil, we've got sticky conditions, clods, mud, if you like, some haulm. Where do we start? Okay, so some important numbers to remember. Number 1, if we're running these clod rollers, the P rollers, in the opposite direction for the best cleaning, because that's what we want, there's a minimum speed or an optimal speed for the spiral roller to be turning at. And that speed is between 120 and 130 RPM. So 120 to 130 revolutions per minute. That's relatively easy to check without a clever meter of some description. And what we do is we go to the end of the machine where we can see the shaft or the bearing rotating. You can either make a mark with a felt tip pen, you can put a cable tie around it, just something so you can visually see it going round. What I normally do, we don't have stopwatches these days, I get my phone out, I get my stopwatch running, I'll have the machine running where I think it ought to be in terms of speed, press go, time that for 30 seconds or a minute, and I'll just count that. And you can easily count that sort of RPM. And that'll just give you a basic speed setting, and then you know you're right. So 120 isn't wrong, 130 isn't wrong. It's about where we want to be. But it will seem quite quick. In fact, you will see the crop not gently being carried over the separator. The crop's going to be dancing. We call it dancing, seems to be what everybody says in our industry. But we want that crop to be alive, not pedestrian as it moves over the table. We want to see potatoes, clods, whatever it may be, just moving around and just dancing around on the table, so it's not sitting stationary in the valleys. We need it to be turning over, bouncing, moving down the table. So 120 to 130, absolutely where we want to be. Okay, we've got that sorted, we know where we are. Next, as important, if not more important thing, is the gap between the spiral roller and the clod roller. So it's the clod roller after the spiral roller, where I've got my hand. Now, what's absolutely crucial with these machines is the distance between the rib, the top of the rib, and the clod roller itself. We don't want the two touching, because all that will do is create excessive wear. One's going to be rubbing on the other, wearing each other out, of no benefit. On the other hand, we don't want an enormous gap. If you run a gap, and I could be saying 5-10 millimetres, a substantial gap, perhaps you can get your fingers in, all that's going to do is make it incredibly aggressive. On top of that, it takes away the ability for that spiral roller to deform in as it's taking stones and clods through. So if you imagine in wet conditions, it's muddy, that clod's quite sticky but quite soft. Having a gap there may seem a good idea because it's very aggressive, we're getting a lot of cleaning initially, but what's going to happen is that clod roller is just going to smear mud and pack mud in between those rib rollers. So after a period of time, what you'll find is this roller, the spiral roller, will be completely muddied up. It'll look like a sausage, and the gap will then grow bigger to the point it's touching the clod roller, and then all we've got at that point is a smooth roller and another smooth roller, and no cleaning, but a lot of energy to drive, because one will start dragging against the other. So having a gap is bad news, certainly in the wet conditions. Okay, we really want that spiral roller to be changing shape as it's rotating, as clods are being forced between a non-existent gap. So that's really quite an important one, so think about that in wet weather. If you're seeing these full up with mud, probably go and have a look at the gap. Is it too big? That's a really important one. So secondly to that, the height of the clod roller. All right, so we can lift these clod rollers up and down. They go through a range of about 1.5 inch travel, 36-7 millimetres. What we get with that is the higher the clod roller, it becomes more difficult for anything to escape over the top of it. So if you imagine we've got your crop sat in the valley doing its job, we lift the clod roller quite high, it's more difficult for anything to escape over the top. So it's the good and the bad, I suppose. The good thing is the clods will stay in there for longer, and they'll get nibbled for longer by these ribs, more cleaning. It's actually very good on stones. Stones do tend to bounce out of the valleys quicker than clods, so to keep that clod roller a bit higher, especially steel ones, the stones tend not to escape, so we get actually a better cleaning job done on stones just by having that clod roller that bit higher. And then the third thing is where we do the fine tuning, and that's about the speed of the clod roller. So how I explain that, we talk about the valley. We always talk about the valley. So we've got the spiral roller, if you like, travelling this way. We've got the valley, and we've got stones, clods, whatever, sat in there. Now, all that clod wants to do is escape over the top and disappear down the table. We want to keep that in there for longer, and we're running the clod roller in the opposite direction. The faster we turn that clod roller, the more it's trying to hold the clod in for longer. It's trying to push the clod down so it extracts it, and it's trying to hold it in there for as long as it can. So fast, in reverse, is the most aggressive, but we can run it very, very slowly too. Providing it is moving, no matter how slow it turns, providing it's moving, which means the scraper underneath the clod roller will keep cleaning it, we're fine. So we have a big range. We go anywhere from 30 RPM, so that's one turn every 2 seconds, all the way up to about 170 RPM. So there's a huge range there, and that's very easy to do on our control box just by speeding it up and slowing it down. And that is also done on every pair of rollers. So we can have a different speed on the last pair, to the middle pair, to the first pair. So we've got all those adjustments. So, just really in summary, for main crop potatoes, when we want good cleaning, to start, 120 to 130 RPM on your spiral roller. We really want this gap to be as close as possible. So just to emphasise that, when we set these machines up in the factory, we adjust the clod roller back till we can just touch on the spiral roller, and then we just back that off a fine amount. If I said the thickness of a piece of paper all the way along, that's where we want to be, as close as that. We don't want to be rubbing, we don't want a big gap. Sheet of paper is about where we need to be. The height's less critical. I think that will just be a case of, if you need a bit more cleaning, let's lift it up, or if you're stoning. Generally start that in the middle, and speed of the clod roller, why not start halfway? Start it in the middle of your speed range, halfway, and that would be your place to start. Okay, so that should then cover really getting you going. Okay, right, so we should have a look at a video really of how this machine operates. Popped this video together about a year ago, and it's just an overview really of what does what on the machine, how you can adjust your settings to get it to do different things. And I'm just going to run through the video. I'm going to pause from time to time and explain a little bit more about what we're seeing in front of us. So we've got some very stiff hard clod, and it's going to take a lot of separating it out. Certainly much more than it would do on soft clod, for instance. So the first thing we come to, I'm just going to pause the video here just for a moment so we can talk a little bit more about it, and that is your adjustments. And the first adjustment we're looking at on this particular video is lifting the clod rollers up and down. So as you'll see as the video runs through, depending on what operating control system you've got, whether it's the push button type or you've got a HMI system, basically one way or another we can lift these clod rollers up or down. And in this particular video we've got some really hard compacted soil. It will crush and it will chew through the rollers, but it is quite hard, and the harder the clod is, and the larger the clod is as well, the more time it takes to be chewed through the rollers. So clod rollers are important in lots of different ways in terms of speed and whatnot, but lifting the clod roller in the highest position, particularly in this video, what that's going to do is going to make it harder for the clods to escape out the valley and move further down the table. So the video shows how you adjust it and what you can expect to see on the table. And I'll run this again now, just so we can see the actual movement of the clod roller and what you have to do. Fairly simple, fairly self-explanatory, but as you see, the clod roller is in a high position. It makes it much harder for the clods to escape past. So that's important to see how that's working. Now, the second thing, a really interesting one, and something you can't explain without some pictures really, is what we're seeing in front of us, and that is about the speed of the spiral rollers. So I've just paused the video again. You can just replay that back a couple of times if you want to see. But as I said in the earlier part of the tutorial, clods need time to be separated. So when they drop in the valleys, they need to sit in there for as long as it really takes to get extracted, or at least get some of the clod sizes reduced to smaller clods before it moves down the table into the next valley. So what we don't want is the table to be overloaded with crop. And as you'll probably see, when it's running at a nice suitable pace and there's plenty of room on the table for the potatoes and the clods to move left to right, upwards and downwards, if we don't give it the space for the clods to be extracted, they'll simply get pushed forward by the crop that's piling up behind it. And the video shows it quite well. And how we've shown that is by speeding up or slowing down the spiral rollers. Now, just run the video again and you can see hopefully the difference it makes by speeding it up and slowing it down. But there is a important lesson here as much as anything, and that is, you would think slow everything down for more cleaning. Well, the opposite effect is what really happens. So the crop is being fed on at the same pace. If you find your sweet spot for spiral rollers, and we've always said 120 to 130 RPM, you'll get a nice even flow of crop, you'll get the best cleaning, the best self-cleaning of the spiral rollers, and it's important that we keep that speed high. Slowing it down, all it does is apart from it reducing the self-cleaning, it also then overloads the table because the crop is simply slowing down and not moving over quick enough. So what we're looking for is, the more cleaning we need, we want at least no more than 50% of the table covered, or the separator covered in crop, so every clod, every potato's got some space to move around to. It's important to give plenty of space for the crop to move around and have time to clean. It is a really important thing, and the harder those clods are, as you can see from the video right now, it takes a while for those clods to get chewed through, so bear that in mind with the speed and the aggressiveness when you're setting your rollers, and give everything time to do its best cleaning job, which is a really important thing to do as well. Just finally on the video here, we can see now how the clod rollers can be changed in terms of the direction that they're running. Each separator that we build gives you the chance to run each pair of clod rollers in one direction or another. So on a 6-row system, clod rollers 1 and 2 can run either directions, rollers 3 and 4 again the same, and each pair thereafter you've got control over. So if you're not looking for a lot of aggressive cleaning, you can simply just run maybe just one pair of clod rollers in reverse, or 2 pairs, or whatever you want. So you've got that flexibility in there. Okay, so we're going to run now on to a second video. It's actually much older, showing a few different situations for the Evolution separator. One's got quite soft clod, and it shows you how well that cleans and about crop flow. But at the start of this video, which we've just run now, shows you drier conditions, easier conditions, but with a lot of horn. I'm just going to pause that video quite quickly just to show you a few features that you might want to consider if you're in this similar sort of environment. So what you'll see there is what is basically a nylon brush that sits above the separator. Not mentioned it before, but it is something we do use on occasion, something for you to consider about. So if you're going through with a situation where there's perhaps a lot of dry horn that's quite long, or some dry weed, and you're struggling to extract that weed through the rollers, and at the end of the day that leaf or horn won't get extracted until it gets pinched between the 2 rollers. So important that we keep the clod roller and the spiral roller close together. We've always said keep them as close as possible, perhaps just 1 millimetre. But sometimes we just need something to tease the horn down into the valleys to get that extraction and get those pieces of horn pulled through. And the brush is a really good, useful thing. So if you also think about in a horny environment, that we want to give that horn every chance to get extracted. So why wouldn't we lift those clod rollers to the highest position so it's easier to catch those leafy bits of material going over? A second thing to consider, and it always applies, is we don't want to overload the separator. You'll see on this video as I run it through, we're going from dry conditions, or relatively dry, with very little soil to extract, but a lot of horn. Now we're at the opposite end. And what this is about is giving the separator or the crop space to do the separating. And what you'll see on here is clods, potatoes. It looks quite chaotic, but in the main, what you're looking for is those clods being given time to sit in those valleys and get chewed through. So I'm just going to pause it just briefly there so you can just see a little bit more and I can explain better. So we're running these spiral rollers at a good speed. It's sticky. We're running the clod rollers in the opposite direction. So we're going for that base speed on the spiral rollers of about 120 to 130 RPM. Because it's so sticky, we're on the top end. We're around about the 130. We also talk about the gap, and as you'll probably see from where I pause the video, there really is very little gap between the spiral roller and the rubber clod roller. The rubber clod rollers themselves are all running in reverse, as we'd want to do for the best cleaning, and we're running these absolutely 100% flat out in reverse. So they'll be turning about 170 RPM, contra-rotating or in the opposite direction. We have actually got the clod rollers probably only about midway in terms of height, because the separator is relatively flat. There's an awful lot of cleaning to be done on it, but we want to maintain a flow over the separator. Lifting the clod rollers too high up may just mean the crop will sit there a little bit too long and begin to back up or queue up and overwhelm the separator. So we found the happy spot with this particular setup on this particular day. So just something to bear in mind. But what's really important is, and I kind of go on about this, it is really giving clod and stone and whatever time to sit in those valleys long enough to get extracted. I'll run the video now, but as you can see, there's some big lumps that are passing straight over. We can't always deal with the ridiculously large lumps that we sometimes get, but everything sort of coconut size and smaller, it's generally going to be able to separate that out. So as I run the video, you can see we're often just overwhelmed here and there, but when it's got a chance to work, when we're not overwhelming the separator, it will sit and chew those clods through. Last little bit of this video is quite interesting. Just shows what's possible when conditions are exceptionally wet. I won't dwell on it too much. Hopefully you've seen what you've needed to see, and you can understand what I mean by flow and separating and time to work. But this is quite an interesting one. A better environment for separating. We're in a grading line on this situation, and we've got a nice gentle feed on from the conveyor belt. But at the same time, we still stick by the settings. We run the spiral rollers at a good high speed, 120, 130 RPM. Clod rollers are running in reverse, and it's quite capable of taking very large lumps of very soft material out. So just running that to the end there. Yep, you can see it's running about maybe a tenth of its actual speed. But as you can see, providing the clod can get into that valley and be given enough time, we should get very, very good cleaning. So that hopefully just gives you a bit of a visual idea of how it works, what your adjustments are. But the most important thing is take your time, go through each and every one of those videos, make sure you fully understand exactly how it works, where the adjustments are. Hopefully that's been a lot of help. Thank you very much.